perfect day for a bank robbery.
Yeah, that's right.
There are 100 in there? She tries to cover up her face. We'll take them.
Can you do this?
Hey, that's good.
What do we have here?
This is Dr. J, the juggler. How you doing? We're just strolling around the streets all evening long here, so go get some food. Even while the robbery is taking place.
My name is Nick Kramanos and I'm from Russia. I did not actually do anything. I didn't rob any banks. I didn't go any bang bang or shoot shoot. This was just me in my car as quiet as me.
Come into my heart, tell me, darling, we will never part. I need you, darling, so come and go with me. So come go with me. So come go with me. Darling, come and go with me. Whoa, 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 whoa. All right, thank you. Thank you. All right.
Shortly after noon on a Monday, during this robbery, $17,000 was taken. In today's dollars, that would be more than $400,000.
May 14th, 1917 began as a beautiful late spring morning. But before the day would be over, Castle Shannon would be enveloped in violence and death. The 4 Russian immigrants that came to Castle Shannon that day came with one intent: to rob the First National Bank of Castle Shannon. They parked their getaway car up on Washington Avenue, today called Castle Shannon Boulevard, near where the Ice Castle is. The 4 immigrants were already drunk from having celebrated their leader's birthday earlier that morning. As they walked down the street from their car, the leader, Mikhail Titov, handed each of the bandits a gun and said, "This is the plan. When we get to the bank, I'll go in first, then you follow me." As they walked in, the 4 desperados simply opened fire on the bank tellers. The one teller, Frank Irby, dove underneath his teller's window, grabbed his pistol, and returned fire. But by the time the shooting ended, both tellers would lie mortally wounded, and the bank robbers would escape with $17,000. As the drama unfolded, 11-year-old Margaret McKellar witnessed the entire event from the second-story window of the Oddfellows Hall where she and her mother resided. Margaret was home from school for lunch.
My name is Margaret. I was 11 years old when the bank robbery happened. My mother was the bank custodian. She worked there for 17 years. I remember coming home from school for lunch. Mother was in the kitchen making me something to eat. I was at the kitchen table. It was just afternoon. Suddenly there was a lot of shooting. Mother said, "Oh my goodness, what's all that?" I said, "Oh, the kids said there was a mad dog running loose." I went to the window to look out. I stood on a kitchen chair and look out when I see someone coming down the alley. "Mama, someone's coming down the alley with a gun." I could see everything. I think the bandits were surprised. They didn't expect to see so many people coming down the streets and alleys with guns. The girl across the street from the bank was Agnes Carlisle. She was 17. She went home every day for lunch. You see, she worked as a clerk in the grocery store right next to the bank. One of the tellers in the bank, Frank Irby, would flirt with Agnes. Whenever he wanted to get her attention, he would run a ruler along the iron grill. Agnes would look up and say, "Hi," or something. Agnes was home having lunch when she heard the gunshots. She went to her room, grabbed her father's rifle, and started shooting out of it at the robbers. Mother grabbed her bank keys. I'm going to the bank, she said. Now you get back to school. Don't dilly-dally on your way back. When Mother got back, there were a lot of people standing around. She told them to go home, that she was going to lock up the bank. Mr. Irby was on the floor. She said he was gone. Then she went over to Mr. McLean. He was nearly gone. Mother said to this day that she knew Mr. McLean wanted to tell her something, but he couldn't talk. When I got back to school, the teachers kept it quiet. Some of the kids lived out there in Castle Shannon hadn't even heard about it. It was all kept very quiet. That night at the supper table, Mother said again that she knew Mr. McLean wanted to tell her something, but he couldn't talk. Mother didn't think Mr. Irby exchanged shots with the robbers, but she knew Mr. McLean had. He always said, if they rob my bank, I'll fight. I'll go down fighting. Mama always told him it wasn't worth it. The money can be replaced, but you can't be. Mr. McLean had 3 children who became orphans that day.
Leading a small posse to the bank was the town's Justice of the Peace, George Beltshoover.
I'm George Beltshoover. I'm the Justice of the Peace for Castle Shannon. I was eating lunch in my house around noon the day of the robbery. My house was about 300 feet from the bank. Well, I headed out of my house across the tracks around 12:30. I had some hearings around 1. And this woman runs out and yells, "My God, George, come quick, they're robbing the bank." So I ran across Washington Avenue, a vacant lot, and the tracks, and right up the stairs to the bank. When I got to the door, I looked through the door. There were some men coming out of a room in the bank, and they were shooting. It sounded to me like it was a shooting gallery. Well, I backed off down the steps about 6 feet from the door, and I took up my position. Then one man came out, then 2. They had pistols. I couldn't tell you if they were Colts. I couldn't tell you if they were automatics. I don't know what sort of guns there were. He was moving too damn fast. I had brought my shotgun along with me, so I lowered it at them, and I yelled, "Raise your hands, you sons of bitches!" And then I pulled the trigger, and then nothing happened. It were empty. It weren't my fault, though. I got the shotgun off of Mike Galco as I crossed the tracks. Well, them 2 fellows, they lowered their guns and they started shooting at me. I stayed as long as I could, but it was getting a little too warm, so I left. I went around the corner in the alley behind the bank, and I don't know what happened. When I came to, my nose was bleeding and I had a bump in the back of my head. Folks said I must have gotten hit with a sack of gold or coins or something. It sure was something. My nose was broke. Well, I ran down to my mother's house, down to her shop down there, and I got my shotgun. They said I should stay there at the house, but I said, no, I'm going with the boys. I ran down to the track and I yelled for automobiles. Well, this fellow, Lachlan, the mortuary director, he brought up his machine and we got in. And the boys said, what do we do if we come upon them? And I said, shoot, and shoot to kill.
Raise your hands, you sons of bitches! Yeah! Go, 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 go!
As George lay on the ground nearly unconscious, the bandits split up into 2 groups. 2 of the men ran through the backyards of the houses adjoining the bank, and 2 ran towards the getaway car. Sam Barkons and John Tush headed across the backyards, including Dr. Kerr's backyard, and Dr. Kerr and the pharmacist J.J. Doyle pursued those bank robbers and pushed them away from the getaway car up the hill towards the golf course. The other 2 bandits, Mikhail Tidoff, the leader, and Haraska Garrison, made their way through a running gauntlet of fire from the townspeople as they headed for their getaway car parked up on Washington Avenue. Pursuing them in particular was one townsman named Nick Yost. Yost was the superintendent of the Pittsburgh Railway, and he followed them with a pistol in each hand. As he followed them up the road, firing away, one of the bandits shot Nick Yost in the shin and caused him to fall to the ground, and allowed the bandits to get to their car and make good on their getaway.
robbers down Pine Avenue and up to the Mount Lebanon golf course, where Dr. Carr and his posse of townspeople apprehended Sam Barkins in the woods behind the golf course. Mrs. Irma Carr was surprised by the robbers while hanging up laundry in her backyard, as the robbers jumped her fence and ran through her yard.
My name is Irma Carr. I live at the corner house on Pine and Poplar Streets. My husband is Dr. John Carr, who chased the bandits into the woods behind the golf course. It was shortly after noon. I was in the back part of my yard, and I saw two men go over a fence about 25 yards from me. I heard shots and ran to get the dog in. I thought they were shooting mad dogs. And when this man, the larger one, was on top of the fence, I called to him. "What was the trouble?" I asked. He didn't speak. He just turned and pointed his gun at me. I ducked inside as quick as I could. The two men dropped down off the fence, into the alley, and up the back of my lot, and after that I didn't see them. The man in the lead was carrying a sack. The other one, the larger one, was running a ways behind the first man. I went inside to get out of the way as fast as I could. When I looked through my window, I saw my husband John running up the alley after these two men with a gun in his hand. He ran past the house and I didn't see where he went. John told me later that he had followed the two men up Pine Street towards the golf course. He said he fired 3 shots and thought he had shot one of the men. John said the evidence of Dr. Schildecker at the coroner's hearing was proof he hadn't shot the man. John said he would have shot the man on his left side. Dr. Schildecker said the entry wound of the larger man was on the right side of his head. After John passed by the house, I could hear people screaming and yelling as they ran up the street past my house and towards the golf course. A lot of them were screaming, "Kill him." Others were yelling, "String him up."
Why did you go to him? Stop it! Look!
It's dead.
We're now directly behind the bank, and the townspeople heard the noise, and everybody started to gather and chase the bank robbers. 2 went up that way. The 2 smart ones went that way towards the getaway car. I got shot! And that was Mr. Yost getting shot in the knee.
This is the getaway car where Nick Kamanos waited patiently for the 4 men he had driven to Castle Shannon. When Mikhail Titov and Harashka Garrison came running toward the car, they shouted to Kamanos to start up the vehicle. Kamanos took them down Castle Shannon Boulevard, the only paved road in the area, to Green Tree, where they all got out. Authorities later suspected that the 2 robbers, who were never seen again, hid out in an abandoned mine for several days. We do know that Titov went back to Russia, where he lived until his death.
Hello. My name is Nick Kamanos and I'm from Russia. I came to the US in 1907. I left a wife and 2 children behind. I worked as a millwright for 10 years for a cement company in Pittsburgh. On May 11th, 1917, 2 Russian men and a 3rd man approached me in the garage where I kept my machine, a 1916 Maxwell. The 3rd man, Mikhail Titov, wanted me to take him and some others to a mine on the south side. "Can you take us to the mine? 4 of us would like to go to a mine to obtain water," he said. He said there are no tracks, no streetcars that could take them there. And he said he wanted to go the next Monday, May 14th. But I said, I take him if you pay me. He asked how much I did want. I said, $7, but I need half of it now. He said, if I'm going to pay half of it to you now and half of it on Monday, I might as well pay it all to you now. And he did. Then he told me where to meet him, under the bridge on 5th Avenue. Now, when I showed up, he said, wait 5 minutes, others were coming too. And he came back with 3 others. They sat in the back seat, Tito sat next to me and told me where to drive. Now, after 10 minutes, they told me to stop. And they all got out and went into a saloon. And they told me to stay with the car. After about another 20 minutes, they all came out, and Tito, their leader, I guess, told me to continue driving. Now, the men in the back seat, they talked amongst themselves, but I could not hear them. The machine makes a lot of noise. Now, after a few minutes, they told me to stop here, right here. And they said, they'll all be back in 5 minutes. And they went straight out, is around the corner, and I waited in my machine resting until they came back. Now, while I was lying here resting, okay, I was resting, okay? I heard the sound from over the hill. It was the sound that the gun makes, and someone help me out. My English is not so good. What is the sound that the gun makes? Bang. Bang, yes, thank you so much, bang. I heard shooting from somewhere. And I sat up and I looked around, but I did not see anything. So I lay back in my original position. Now, after a few minutes, I looked up and I saw 2 men running towards me. Now, one of them was one of the men who hired me. The other was the man that I picked up. They were running, and they were shooting behind them. When I got to my machine, I said, what is this? The man who hired me, Tito, said, there's a fight back there. They started a fight back there. Where are the others, I asked. He said, they started a fight. Start on the machine, he shouted, go, go. Now, they jumped into the backs of the machine, and then one of them was shooting back behind the machine. After about 10 minutes, they told me to stop. We're going to the mine, said the man who hired me. Okay, I take you, I said. But he said, we're getting off now. Then I asked what had happened back there. The man who hired me said, those sons of bitches caused trouble. They caused the trouble. I told him again I could take him to the mine. And then one of them said, the way you drive, I think I'd rather walk. So I let them get out. So I started home, and a machine came up from behind me and signaled. You know, the automobile signaled to pass, to pull to one side. So I pulled over, they drove ahead about 50 yards and stopped, and then they signaled for me to stop. Now after I stopped, I looked up and I saw 2 men come running towards me with revolvers. I got frightened. I thought they were going to hold me up. So they pulled me out of my machine and started searching through my pocket, shouting, "Has you got the money? Has you got the money? Has you got the money?" And I said, I don't got no money. At the time, all I had was $10. So they put me in the back of their machine and took me to Castle Shannon. They took me to a house, past a lot of people that were shouting, "Hang him! Hang him! Hang him!" You know, inside the house, 2 men started to beat me. They punched me in the face, in the jaw, in the eye. They just kept hitting me. Then the police came and they took me to jail. They beat me too. They beat me all the way to the courthouse, up the stairs, in the office. There, 2 men, they're detectives, I think, started to show me photographs saying, "Do you know the men in the photos? Who are the men in the photos?" But I could not see. Then they told me that, they told them that I could not see. They just beat me again about the head and the face. I was spitting out blood.
You've all heard of Double Jeopardy, right? And I'm not talking about the second round of the longest running game show in TV history. You've all heard of the 5th Amendment, which protects you from self-incrimination. How many times have you heard the police tell the person who has just been arrested, "You have the right to remain silent, and anything you say may be used in court"? Those are your Miranda rights. But it's 1917, and we're 50 years away from those rights coming into law. 50 years ago, law enforcement officials saw no reason to inform criminals of their rights, or offer them a crash course in the U.S. Constitution, and especially if you're a foreigner. And our forefathers felt that one need not know the law to be protected by it. Thus, a Russian like Nick Kamanos, although not a U.S. citizen, was still protected by the laws of the country he was residing in. However, our forefathers had the foresight to include a clause, the Fifth Amendment, which is intended to protect citizens from what so many were experiencing at the hands of British law prior to the Revolution. It reads, "Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy for life and limb." That's double jeopardy. You see, Nick Kamanos had already been acquitted of killing bank teller Daniel McLean on May 14, 1917, during the Castle Shannon bank robbery. And now, days later, he was on trial for the murder of bank teller Frank Irby. Kamanos had been hired by Mikhail Titov, the ringleader of the bank robbers. Or more specifically, Kamanos' 1916 Maxwell touring car had been hired. Kamanos, who demanded $7 payment, was told he was driving Titov to a mine on the south side and would need the car for about 3 hours. When Titov showed up with 3 others, Kamanos said nothing. And when those four stopped off at a saloon early on in the drive, Nick Kamanos may have thought his actual job was to cart around men who planned to get drunk. So you see, even 100 years ago, we had designated drivers. Or so Nick Kamanos thought.
Hear ye, the Court of Allegheny County is now in session. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Nick Kamanos on a charge of murder in the first degree. The Honorable James R. McFarland presiding. All rise.
You may be seated. Gentlemen, present yourselves.
Harry R. Rowan, Your Honor, for the Commonwealth.
A.C. Kramer, Your Honor, for the defense. Your Honor, I submit to the court that all charges in this case be dismissed on the grounds of double jeopardy.
Objection, Your Honor. It's immaterial and irrelevant, and I would like to add, Your Honor, just having had surgery, I would appreciate if the court would allow me to remain seated when I address the court.
So granted.
Thank you.
The fact that my client was acquitted of one murder is far from irrelevant, Your Honor. In fact, it is quite clear in the Constitution that no man may be subjected to the same...
Mr. Kramer, we spoke of this at the pretrial hearing. Your motion is denied.
Objection, Your Honor. This case has been compromised by Mr. Kramer's outburst. I ask that the jury be excused if we're to continue this matter.
As we should do so, if we continue, I mean, but we shouldn't continue. Mr. Kamanos has been acquitted of murder already in this case.
Mr. Kramer, we have already discussed this. Your dismissal is denied. Mr. Rowand, your objection is overruled. Both of you stand down. Gentlemen of the jury, as this issue has been broached, I believe it right for the court to explain itself. Mr. Kramer claims under Article 1, Section 5 of the U.S. Constitution that Mr. Kamanos may not be tried for murder again based on the fact that he was earlier acquitted of the murder of Daniel McLean, a teller in the bank, and thus could not be tried for the murder of Frank Irby, the second teller murdered in this single incident. A robbery of a bank in Castle Shannon, as that would be double jeopardy. Counsel for the defendant contends that the fact it was one and the same in the perpetration of both men were killed required the court to instruct you members of the jury to render a verdict in favor of the defendant. However, the act of April 22nd, 1794 found that the murder perpetrated in the commission of a robbery is murder in the first degree. By the common law, where a murder was committed by a body of men engaged in robbery, the act of killing is treated as if specifically committed by each individual. Each is responsible for such collateral acts growing out of the general design as may be committed by his associates, and each may be tried for each murder. In this case, there were 2 independent homicides resulting from 2 malicious shootings. The defendant, in the former trial, could not be found guilty of the murder of Frank Irby, and he was not acquitted of that offense, nor was he in jeopardy. The defendant was tried and acquitted of the murder of Daniel McLean, the cashier of the Castle Shannon Bank, during the perpetration of a robbery of the bank in which Frank Irby, assistant cashier of the bank, was killed at the same time. Gentlemen of the jury, the main question are these. Was Mr. Kamanos in the bank, and did he have knowledge of the purpose of these men, and was he aiding and abetting them? Mr. Kramer, your motion is denied.
I call for an exception.
Duly noted, exception allowed, and bill sealed. Mr. Owen, you're a witness, and I hope you're feeling better.
Thank you, Your Honor. I call Stanley Robbery.
Place your left hand on the Bible, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Take a seat.
Mr. Rowell, do you know the location of the First National Bank there?
Yes, I do. I have a deposit there.
Did you know Mr. Frank Irby, the assistant cashier?
Yes.
Did you have occasion to visit the bank on May 14, 1917?
Yes, sir. I went there about 12:30.
Tell the jury what you did when you entered the bank.
I came in and I had a check for $100 deposit, and I went to Mr. McLean, who gave me a slip. In the meantime, about 6 men came in the bank and stood around me and started shooting. They just started shooting. I was scared and started to move back towards the door. One of the fellows says, "Stay here," and hands up. He pushed me into the corner. He says, "Stay here, and when we leave, we will let you go."
Objection. Unless this is to be followed up by evidence that all of this was in the presence of this defendant, we object to it and move that it be stricken from the record.
It certainly will be followed up, with Your Honor, please, by other evidence connecting the defendant with this robbery, and is coming out of the bank immediately after the shooting.
Continue, Mr. Rowan.
What happened next?
He took a handkerchief and put it over my eyes because I started to look at what they were doing. "Don't look at them fellas because I shoot you," he says, and I turned my head against the wall. He took some rope from his pocket and tied my hands.
Did they have guns?
Yes, I don't know what kind, but they were shooting at everything.
How many men were in the bank?
I think there were 5 or 6.
Objection. The question was how many men were in the bank and not how many men he thought he saw.
Sustained. Rephrase your question, Mr. Rowan.
You say you saw them as they went out?
I heard one of them say, "Run away" in Russian.
Do you understand the Russian language?
Yes, sir, I'm Russian.
Did you know any of these men?
No, sir. Never saw them before.
After they left, did you see Mr. Irby?
I went into the cage. Mr. Irby's head was under the counter. He was dying.
The man who pointed the gun at you, what was he wearing?
He had on a grayish coat.
What color was his hair?
Brown, I think. But it was covered by a cap. He was wearing a dark cap.
Mr. Rowell, is the defendant the man you saw in the bank with the cap on?
Well, I can't tell you.
What?
I'm not sure. I think he was in the bank. I'm not sure.
Objection. I move that the court strike out from the record the part of the answer, "I think he was in the bank," as the witness said he cannot tell.
Motion to strike refused.
I call for an exception, Your Honor.
Exception noted, bill sealed. Continue, Mr. Rowan.
Your witness, Mr. Kramer.
Mr. Raba, were you tied in a position where you could see the men that were in the bank and what they were doing?
Certainly.
And still, you don't know whether there were 5 or whether there were 6?
Well, I think...
I didn't ask what you think. What did you see? Were there 5 or 6 men?
I say it wasn't less than 6.
It wasn't less than 6.
Yes, sir.
So you say there were 6 men in there?
Well, not less than 6.
So there may have been more than 6.
Not more than 6. It was 5. I can't tell you.
In other words, you don't know how many men were in the bank.
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel's badgering the witness.
No, Mr. Rowan. Counsel for the defense is just trying to get the facts. Were there 6 robbers, 5 robbers, 7 robbers? Were there a dozen robbers? This man witnessed the entire incident and clearly said he looked at the robbers despite being told not to do so, and even described to you what they were wearing. But despite that kind of detail, he doesn't know how many men were in the bank. I'd just like to determine there were 5 robbers, 6 robbers, or 100.
Your Honor, counsel is using sarcasm to summarize his closing argument.
Gentlemen, both of you stand down. Mr. Rowan, your objection is overruled. Proceed, Mr. Kramer.
May I have that last question read back?
Kramer. So there may have been more than 6. Rawa. Not more than 6. It was 5. I can't tell you.
So, you are sure there were 6 men there?
Well, not less than 6. It seems to me it was 6. Well, at the time,
I am not asking you what you think. Are you sure there were 5 or 6? Or don't you know whether it was 5 or 6?
Not less than 6.
Might there have been 7 then?
No, sir.
Do you know, sir, positively that there were just 6 men? Do you know for a positive fact that there were 6 men?
I think it was 6.
You are not sure, Mr. Rawa, are you?
Well, I can't tell you.
You can't tell me for sure?
No, sir.
And you can't tell for sure what they wore, the color of their clothes, can you?
Sure I can tell because I was looking at the time.
All right. Some of them wore gray coats?
Most of them wore black coats.
Well, how many had black coats and how many had gray?
I can't tell you that.
You can't tell that either.
Because I couldn't count them.
Could you recognize the men that were in the bank?
Well, I recognize one.
Which one?
Because he had a revolver to my head. I was looking at him for about 10 minutes, so I could recognize him.
You were looking at him for all the 10 minutes you were in there, were you?
Yes, sir.
So you didn't have much of a chance to look at the other men then, did you?
I told you. He said, if you're going to look at them, I'm going to shoot you.
So you didn't look at them?
I looked anyway.
And you recognized one of them?
Yes, sir.
The man who held the revolver to your head?
Yes, sir.
And you can't swear to any of the others?
No.
You don't know whether Sam Barkins, the man you saw in the hospital, was in the bank or not?
I'm sure he was.
Then you recognize 2 of them, not 1.
Well, yes, I guess.
Stand up, Mr. Kamanos. Do you know whether this man was in the bank?
I can't tell you that.
Mr. Rawa, you were a witness at the coroner's hearing, were you not, on June 19th? Weren't you down at the morgue as a witness?
I think so.
You think so. You were sworn in and testified there, didn't you?
I think so.
And you were asked if this was one of the...
I don't remember whether I was there or not.
You don't remember whether you were there or not. And you don't remember you were a witness and sworn there, and don't remember if this man was present? Would you care to see the transcript from your testimony, Mr. Rawa? More specifically, your testimony? You don't remember?
I don't remember.
Do you remember when Sam Barkin's case came up in this court on the 11th day of December 1917?
Yes, sir.
And didn't you say at that trial that you couldn't identify any of the men in the bank?
Objection, unless the question and the answer are read to the witness that was put to him and answered at the time.
I haven't the evidence in the Barkin's case. However, I can produce it, Your Honor. Mr. Rawa, weren't you called as a witness and testified on Thursday, December 13th, in the trial of this man here?
Yes, sir.
And weren't you asked the following question? Question, you testified here in this case on Monday, didn't you? Answer, yes, sir. Question, and didn't you in your testimony say that you could not identify any of them? Answer, well. Question, didn't you say that on Monday? Answer, yes, sir, I did. Do you remember giving that testimony?
I might.
Mr. Rawa, you admitted then that you could not identify any of the men at the bank. You stated that, didn't you?
As I get the construction you put on it, you say Didn't you admit that you had testified at some other time and thus and so? But that is not an admission that he could not identify them. That is an admission that he stated that at the trial.
On another trial, under oath, in the case of Sam Barkins.
That was not an admission in the trial December 13th, 1917?
But in this man's case, Thursday.
But that is what you are claiming to read to him.
His admission that he had not previously made on that day that he could not identify anybody.
Then the question is not strictly correct.
But it's affecting this man's credibility.
He did not admit anything of the kind. He admitted that he made the statement at the other trial. If you want to get that out of him, you should put it to him straight, Mr. Kramer.
So, today, you say that you can identify two men, the one who held a gun on you and the one who was in the hospital.
Yes, sir.
Didn't you, on Tuesday, December the 11th, state under oath that you couldn't identify any of the men?
I object to the form of the question unless counsel produces the record.
I will produce the record tomorrow. I cannot do it today.
You can ask him without the record. The record is not the only evidence.
That was in the Sam Barkins trial. Didn't you so testify?
Well, I don't remember if I said that.
Your memory isn't so good, is it, Mr. Rawa?
No, sir.
You were pretty excited when the shooting was going on, and nervous and afraid for your life. You can't undertake to say the things that transpired there, can you? Mr. Rawa, your testimony in this case is practically the same as it was in the previous case of Mr. Kamanis.
Objection, immaterial and irrelevant.
Sustained.
No further questions, Your Honor.
I call George Belsuver to the stand.
Place your left hand on the Bible, raise your right hand. You solemnly swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Mr. Belsuver, do you hold any official title?
Justice of the Peace.
Do you remember where you were around noon on May 14, 1917?
I was at my house, having lunch.
How far is your house from the bank?
About 300 feet.
Did you visit the bank around noon that day?
I left the house around 12:15, go back to my office. I had a couple of hearings at 1 o'clock, but I didn't get to my office.
Why not?
Mrs. Chandler ran out on the street and says, "My God, George, come quick, they're robbing the bank."
What did you do?
I went up to the bank.
Tell the court what you saw.
When I got to the bank, I went up, looked through the door. I saw some men running out of the little room right out of the bank. They were shooting. It sounded to me like a shooting gallery. After I looked in, I stepped back toward the bushes.
Did you see the men come out of the bank?
One man came out, and then two came out together.
Can you identify any of those men here?
Right there is the first man who came out of the bank.
Do you mean the defendant sitting there?
The man sitting at that table.
Anything in his hand?
He was carrying a pistol.
What did you do then?
I had grabbed a shotgun from somebody, so I stood my ground and aimed it at them. "Stop right there, you sons of bitches," I shouted. When I fired my shotgun, it was empty. The two fellows who came out together leveled their guns at me. I stayed as long as I could. It got a little too hot and I left. As I went around the corner, I don't know what happened. To be candid about it, when I came to, my nose was bleeding and I had a bump on the back of my head.
When you came to, Squire, where did you go?
I went to my mother's store, grabbed my shotgun, and went to the streetcar track, hollered for someone to bring around an automobile. Edward Laughlin, the undertaker, brought one. I got in the car, and the boys say, "What will we do if we run into them?" I says, "Shoot, and shoot to kill."
Where did you go then?
We went to Mount Lebanon. One lady, I don't know her name, says a car went by in the other direction with 3 or 4 men in it. "We'll go that way," I says. I asked a Bell telephone man who was repairing the line if he had seen anybody. He says, yes, a man was going through and was wringing his hands.
As to what these men said to the witness, I object to what is hearsay and ask that it be stricken.
Motion allowed.
Tell what you did, Squire, without telling what people told you as you went along the road.
We went to Mount Lebanon and doubled back to Castle Shannon.
Did you find anybody?
We did not.
When did you next see the defendant?
In my mother-in-law's front room in the parlor of the house on Willow Avenue.
How was he dressed?
In a dark coat with a slouch hat.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Beltsuver, when you looked in the bank, what did you see?
I saw 3 or 4 men coming out the side door, the little door in the side room. It leads into that little room and then into the cage of the bank proper.
When you stood outside the bank, how many men did you see come out of the front door?
3.
Did the 3 come out together?
Yes, sir.
Did you see any others come out?
No. It got too warm and I went back to the back end of the bank.
If you didn't see them come out, you don't know how many there were then?
I told you there was 3 come out of the bank.
3 was all you saw?
Yes, sir.
Did you know these 3 men?
No, but I recognized them. There was the man who killed himself, the man we found in the woods near the golf course, and this man here.
They rushed right out toward you.
They went right on through. They turned to the left and went up the alley.
And who came out first?
That man right there.
And you ran to the rear and ran into the men there?
I didn't say that. They ran past me and I got struck.
You were excited, weren't you, Squire?
Well, I rather think I was.
And there was a lot of confusion there.
Most undoubtedly there was.
And there's no possible chance of being mistaken about you seeing this defendant come out?
If there was any doubt, sir, I wouldn't sit here and testify about it.
Mr. Kramer, further questions?
Not at this time. However, I reserve the right to recall this witness.
Prosecutor Rowan called 20 witnesses to testify. 3 of the most damning were Nicholas Yost, A.L. Austin, and Charles Berger. Yost testified that he was shot in the shin by Kamanos, who was firing back at him while seated on the driver's side of the vehicle. Austin, a justice of the peace in North Bessemer, testified that Kamanos registered his 1916 Maxwell with him, as per state law, under an assumed name. And Berger, a bartender in McKee's Hotel, testified Kamanos was in his bar the Saturday before the robbery with Sam Barkins, the bank robber who unsuccessfully tried to commit suicide by shooting himself. Defense attorney A.L. Kramer called 17 witnesses, almost half of whom testified to Kamanos' reputation in the community. But the 2 primary witnesses were Sam Barkins and the defendant. Barkins, who had tried to commit suicide by shooting himself through the roof of his mouth, had pled guilty and had been sentenced to death by electrocution.
Is the defense ready? Good. Call your witness first, Call your first witness, Mr. Kramer.
I call Sam Barkins.
Place your left hand on the Bible, raise your right hand. You solemnly swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but truth, to help you God? I did.
Mr. Barkins, you were one of the defendants in this case, were you not?
Yes, sir.
And you pleaded guilty to the charges?
Yes, sir.
Do you know Nick Kamanos?
No, sir, I don't know him.
Do you know Mike Titoff?
Yes, for about 6 years.
Do you know Haraska Garrison?
I boarded with him in Fifth Avenue.
Do you know John Tush?
Yes, he boarded with mine.
Do you remember seeing this man, Nick Kamanos, on May 14th last year?
Yes, sir. I saw him when I came with his automobile. I saw him for the first time that day.
Who was in the automobile with him?
Mike was sitting with him.
Mike Titoff, you mean?
Yes, sir.
And you were standing on the street with Tush and Garrison when you saw him, correct?
Yes, and Mike says, come on in the automobile with us.
And then where did you drive to?
To the south side.
And did you go any place on the south side where the machine made a stop?
Yes, sir. At the saloon on the south side.
And then what did you do at this saloon?
It was Mike's birthday. He treated us all to drinks.
Who do you mean by all?
Hradasco, myself, and Tush.
Did Kamanos go into the saloon?
No, sir.
How long were you in the saloon?
About 25 minutes.
Did Titov tell you anything in the saloon?
He told us not to talk about anything in the car.
When you came out of the saloon, where did you go?
We went a ways along the street. I don't know how far on, and I went to sleep. Mike told me to wake up, he says. What are you sleeping for?
When the car came to a stop, did you all get out?
Tito, for myself, Hradasco, and Tush got out.
Did Nick Kamanos get out?
No, he stayed in the car.
While in the car, did any of you talk about anything?
No, sir. Mike told us not to talk when we were in the saloon.
When you got out of the vehicle, where did you go?
Mike told us to come with him. We walked maybe 5 minutes or so, and Mike says, "Do you know where we are going? We are going to rob and we're going to rob the bank and get money." He gave me a revolver and 2 little ropes.
Now, you did go into the bank, right?
But yes, Mike went first. We were all 3 or 4 steps behind him.
Was Mr. Kamanos at the bank?
No, sir, he was not. He was just the 4 of us, just Tito, Tush, myself, and Garrison.
What happened in the bank?
Well, Mike went up to the teller window, said he wanted change for the 10. Then he told them to raise their hands. When you didn't raise their hands, he started shooting.
There were a lot of shots, were there not?
Oh, I couldn't say. It was a good many shots.
Then what happened?
We went out of the bank. Tush and me were the first out.
Did you carry anything out of the bank at all besides guns?
But I did, a bag of money. I didn't know whether Tush did or not.
And where did you go when you ran out of the bank?
But he ran through the alley, climbed up the fence, and ran up the street. We were running to the woods.
Did you get to the woods, you and Tush?
No, Tush killed himself in the field. I turned around and got his revolver. I had lost mine somewhere, maybe climbing the fence.
You didn't take any bag he had?
No, I had the money myself.
Oh, you had the money yourself. That wasn't a bag, was it?
Yes, sir. I ran. I was intoxicated and went to sleep in the woods.
What was the next you know of?
Well, while I was asleep, I don't know who, but someone shot me.
Where were you shot?
Through the mouth and...
Out through the head.
Out through the head, right here.
You were taken to Southside Hospital?
Yes, sir.
Do you know in what direction Titov and Garrison ran?
No, sir.
Was there anyone else running with you and Tush?
No, sir.
Nick Kamanos was not with you?
No, sir. Just Tush and myself. And there were about 4 people chasing us.
Had you made any arrangements with the defendant, Mr. Kamanos, to rob the bank that day?
No, sir. We didn't talk about anything.
Do you know any arrangement that any of the 4 men who went into the bank had made with Kamanos about robbing that bank that day?
That is objected to, Your Honor, as hearsay.
Objection sustained.
Did you hear any arrangement made by anybody with Kamanos to rob the bank that day?
No, sir.
Your witness, Mr. Rowland.
Mr. Barkins, where do you work?
I work at the cement works in Universal.
The cement works?
Yes, sir.
The same cement works where Nick Kamanos, the defendant, works?
Yeah, he was a millwright.
He was a millwright in the same works?
Yes, sir.
So you knew him?
We were in the same works, but not in the same area.
On Saturday, did you drink with Garrison and Titov?
No, sir. I was drinking with them at the speakeasy on Sunday.
But not on Saturday? Do you know if anyone was drinking with Nick Kamanos on Saturday?
Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Barkins indicated he was not drinking at the bar in question on Saturday. He could not have known if Mr. Kamanos was in that bar drinking on Saturday if he himself was not there.
Objection sustained.
On May 14th, what time did Mr. Kamanos pick you up with his machine?
Around 9 o'clock, I think.
And you stopped at a saloon? How long were you at this saloon?
About half an hour.
How many drinks did you have in that time?
We drank 1 whiskey, 1 beer.
You came back to the car and drove to Castle Shannon. And when you got in this machine, Tito told you not to talk?
No, sir. In the bar. Tito told us not to talk about anything when we got back in the car.
And you say you don't know where you were going when you got back in the car.
No, sir. Not until we got out of the machine and began walking. Then Mike says, we're going to rob the bank today.
Did you see Nick Kamanos on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday before the bank robbery?
Objection, Your Honor. This question has already been answered.
I withdraw the question. No further questions, Your Honor.
I call Nick Kamanos to the witness stand.
Place your left hand on the Bible, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
Nick Kamanos.
Did you ever get any mail addressed to Nick Yakov at the Universal Post Office?
At no time.
Where were you born?
In Russia.
When did you first come to the United States?
In 1907.
Where do you work?
At the cement works in Universal.
For how long?
About 5 years now.
5 years since you last came back from Europe, right?
Yes, I went to Europe 5 years ago.
And you stayed in Europe for how long?
About a year.
And when you came back, where did you work?
It's the same place. I didn't work anywhere else in America except that one place steady.
You are the owner of an automobile.
Yes, sir. Small automobile.
And how many passengers would it hold?
5.
And what make is it?
A Maxwell.
How much did you pay for it?
$655. A little less than a year's salary.
Do you remember being in Castle Shannon on Monday, May 14th?
I don't know the name of that town.
What arrangements, if any, were made for that trip by you on May 14th?
On Friday, I'd gone to the bathhouse, went in the morning and drove back around 5. 3 men came to the shanty and asked me to take them to the mine. They wanted to get a job.
Did you know these men?
2 men I knew, but one I did not know.
The man you didn't know. Had you ever met him before?
I had not.
Tell the court what this man said, the man that you had never met before.
He says, will you take us to a mine? 4 of us like to go to a mine to get work.
Did he say why he wanted to go to the mine in an automobile?
He said there are no tracks to the mine, no streetcar. I asked him, when am I to take you all? He said Monday. I says, all right, I'll take you. If you pay me, I will take you.
And what was said by this man, whom you had never seen before yourself, what was said there?
He said, how much do you want? I said, $7. He said, all right, when you come, I will pay you $7. I said, no, I will not go that way until you pay me now. I said, pay me half. Well, he says, rather than pay you half, I will pay it all. And he paid me. Then he said, come by the large bridge on Monday, I will find you.
And you met him there on Monday?
At about 10, I stopped at the bridge and he came to me. He says, we will go. And I says, well, we will go then. He then got in front and I asked him, where are the others? He says, we will meet them, just go. I drove up the street with some of the 3 men and they were standing there in the street. He says, stop, these are the others. Then I stopped, they got in.
Did you know any of the 3 men who got in the car?
No, none of them.
Where did you go?
Where the man in the seat next to me told me to go.
You mean the boss, Mikhail Tito?
Well, I didn't know who he was. I don't know if he was the boss. He was the man who paid me. We drove for about 10 minutes and he says, stop. Then we stopped, they got out and went into a saloon.
Did you join them? Did you go into the saloon?
No, I stayed with the car.
Did you know where you were?
No, I did not. I just drove as the man who paid me told me to drive.
Had you ever been to the south side before?
No, never before.
How long were they in the saloon?
I can't say, possibly half an hour. I don't really know.
What happened when they came back out?
Well, they all got back in. The guy who paid me sat next to me again. He says, drive. I'll tell him when.
Did anyone say anything to you other than the man sitting next to you?
No, no one spoke. Only the man who paid me. After a while, maybe about 10 minutes, we came to some sort of town. He told me to turn on the Macadam Road. He says, stop here, we're going to the back.
What did he mean by go back?
Objection.
Well, what did he say that would explain it?
He says, the man who paid me, stop, let us out.
We're going to go back.
Did you see where they went?
They walked away from the car behind me. They went around the corner. I no longer saw them.
What did you do?
Well, I stayed with the machine. I rested. I fell asleep.
From the time these men got in your automobile until they got out, did you see any revolvers?
Oh, I did not.
Did you have any idea that they intended to rob a bank?
Objection. Calls for speculation.
Did you hear them say that they intended to rob a bank?
No. The only man who ever spoke was the man who hired me, and he just gave me directions where to go.
Did they tell you at any time the purpose for being there in Castle Shannon?
Other than the man who hired me saying they are going to the mines for work, that's all that I know.
When they got out of your machine at this place, Castle Shannon, what did they say to you?
Objection, repetition. A witness has already answered this question.
Did you shut down your engine, or did you keep your engine going?
Oh, no, I stopped it.
Did you leave your machine at any time?
No. I leaned over in the front, and I was partly laying down, and I remained in that position.
You say you fell asleep. Were you awakened to anything?
I heard loud noises. It sounded like shooting somewhere. I couldn't see anything, so I lay back down. After a few minutes, I looked up and saw two men running towards me.
And they were two of the men who you had taken out there?
Yes, sir. The man who paid me to take them out there, and another man.
What were they doing when they were running towards the machine?
They were running, they were shooting.
What or whom were they shooting at?
I can't say at whom or what they were shooting.
When they got to your machine, what did they say?
I says, "What is this?" And they answer me, "Why, they have a fight there." I said, "Where are the others?" And he said, "The man who paid me, it is those who started the fight, caused the fight." He says, "Start up the machine."
What happened then?
I started up the machine.
Where did you go?
Oh, I don't know. I just drove where he told me to. The man who paid me the $7.
What happened next?
They told me to stop. They told me they was going to go to the mine.
Did you take them to the mine?
I did not. They says, "So where you are driving this machine, we would stone a rock."
Did you see where they went?
No, they just got out and they just started walking away.
How long after these two men left the machine at the place they said was the mine before you were arrested?
Objection. Counsel's not only leading the witness by putting words in the witness' mouth that he did not utter, and I object to the form of the question. They did not at any time say this was the place of the mine, according to this witness.
That is in my question.
But the witness at no time said they told him that was the place of the mine. He said they told him the way he was driving the car, they would rather get out, that they would rather walk.
He also said that they told him that this was the mine.
If counsel will not lead the witness and ask simple questions, what they said when they got out of the car, I will not object.
Would the clerk read back the testimony?
Question. And what did they tell you there? That this was the mine? Answer. Yes, sir. I told them that I will bring them to this place. But they says, the way you are driving this machine, we would rather walk.
Objection overruled.
How long after these men left the car before you were arrested?
I could not say positively. I didn't watch the time, maybe 10 to 15 minutes.
Tell us what happened when you were stopped.
I was driving and another machine was in the rear and they gave me the single, blow the horn for me to get on the side, and I did. I gave them the way, they passed me for about 50 yards and then they stopped. Then I approached them, they shouted for me to stop. Two men came out of the machine with revolvers, they told me to get out of the car and they asked me where I was going. They said I was going to Pittsburgh. When I got out of the machine, they grabbed me, began to search my pockets.
Did you have a weapon?
No.
What else happened?
Well, they asked me, have you got money? I told them, I don't got no money. Just had $10. And they took that.
Who or what did you think these men were?
Objection. Calls for conjecture.
Did they say who they were?
No, sir.
Did they tell you why they were chasing you or arresting you?
Oh, no, sir.
Where did they take you?
They took me to some house. There were a lot of people there.
Were you beaten there?
Objection. Immaterial.
Sustained.
Your Honor, am I to preclude that I will not be able to show how my client was beaten, both by those in the house and the detectives while in courthouse?
That has no bearing on the testimony.
But it does, Your Honor. My client was beaten so badly by the detectives that he cannot remember anything he said to them.
Objection sustained. Proceed, Mr. Kramer.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Did you at any time, Mr. Kamanos, go under an assumed name?
No, sir.
Did you apply for a license for your machine?
Yes, sir.
If I could ask the clerk to show you exhibit number 27 and ask you if that's your signature.
It is.
Did you have insurance for your machine? Thank you.
I did.
The clerk will now show you exhibit 28. Is that your signature?
It is.
Did you at any time have your automobile repaired in a garage?
I did earlier this year. I had tires replaced.
Please show me exhibit 29. Is that your statement from the garage?
It is.
Mr. Kamanos, I'm going to have the clerk show you a picture and ask if you recognize this man.
That is a picture of Mikhail Titov.
Oh, objection. This is objected to unless it's permitted to let me show under what circumstances this man was held in the county detective's office, what duress, coercion, force, and personal violence were used to get these answers.
You can do that, of course.
Did he show you this picture?
Yes, he did.
And did you not tell the detective that Mikhail Titov was the mastermind behind the bank robbery?
Well, I don't believe so. They would hit me whenever they would get the answers they wanted.
Did Detective Tony Romanko show you a photograph of Rossi Garrison? That's exhibit 31. And did you not tell him that you knew him?
I could not say positively, sir. I can't say what I did say. They beat me up so badly for a month. I was spitting up blood. I wasn't even able to hear.
They beat you up at Castle Shannon when you were brought in?
They beat me a little bit there. They beat me a little bit over here. But here they did finish me.
When you were brought back to Castle Shannon, there was quite a crowd of people trying to take you, were there not?
Objection, immaterial, and irrelevant.
What is the purpose of that, Mr. Rowan?
Well, he introduced this matter, his being beaten up, and I may want to investigate it and go farther.
I think we had better confine the testimony to the issue that is before the jury.
I'm well pleased with that ruling. I'll withdraw the question. Did you tell Tony Romanko that you had several days off from work?
I don't know if I did or if I didn't. I was pretty beat up. I can't remember even what I said.
Were you ever in Castle Shannon before?
I have never been there.
Isn't it a fact that you were in Castle Shannon a week before this robbery, between 12 and 1 o'clock? He stood at the corner of the Oddfellows Hall, leaning against the building for some little time. At least 15 minutes.
I was not in any other place except Pittsburgh and Homestead.
Calling your attention to Mr. Offerman, would you please stand up? He's standing in the courtroom and testified earlier to seeing you standing in front of Oddfellows Hall a week before the robbery. Did you see this man? I want this answered yes or no.
No, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Rava, please stand up. Did you not talk to Mr. Rava in the courthouse about the bank having been robbed at Castle Shannon?
Yes, sir.
And did you not tell Mr. Rava the story you have told here on the witness stand about your connection with these men who committed the robbery?
Objected to as improper and incompetent. What he may have told him there, or whether he told him the story here, is not a fair question.
Mr. Rowan, you should ask exactly what he did say if you intend to contradict him. And I assume that is the purpose of your question?
Very well. What did you tell Mr. Rava?
He asked me if I was there in that place. I says, what place? I don't know what place you mean.
Is that all that was said?
Then he went away.
Is that all you said to Mr. Rava?
Oh, yes, sir.
Nothing further.
You say that there were 50 people in the room of the house at Castle Shannon.
Oh, yes, sir, and maybe more. They just looked at me, then someone struck me.
Do you know the man who hit you, or have you seen him in this case?
Yes, sir.
Objection irrelevant.
What is the purpose of the question?
Your Honor, if the man who struck him was a witness in this case, it might explain the witness's attitude in this matter.
Struck him where?
The man who struck him repeatedly in the face in the house where about 50 people stood around, watching. One man stepped forward and struck Mr. Kamanos repeatedly. I want to see if he's a witness in the case.
Very well, proceed.
Have you seen the man who struck you in this house testifying in this case?
Yes, he was here yesterday.
Was this the man?
That man pulled me by the hair and struck me in the face.
You're talking about the man who testified yesterday that you shot him in the leg, correct?
Objection. Mr. Kramer's putting words in the witness' mouth.
Sustained.
Mr. Veraski, stand up. Did this man strike you in the county detective's office?
Objection irrelevant.
I will allow it, Mr. Rowan.
How many times did he strike you?
Steady. He was hitting me, I was leaning over, and they just kept hitting me across the face. First slapping me, and then punching me in the jaw.
What time was this?
I'm not positively sure. It was after midnight. I heard the clock strike 12, maybe 1, maybe later.
Did they take you to jail?
They did, but they brought me back.
How long before they brought you back?
A couple of hours, I guess. As the sun hadn't come up when they brought me back in that room, I could tell because the window in the room, it was still dark out.
You were in the jail for 3 days, were you not?
Yes, sir.
How much sleep did they give you in those 3 days?
About maybe 8 hours. They just kept bringing me back to ask me more questions.
Do you have a license, Mr. McManus?
Yes, sir.
Is that your license application that was shown to you before as the evidence?
Yes, sir.
What name was on it?
It was Nick Krivanos. Krivanos.
And do you have insurance for your machine?
Yes, sir.
Was that your insurance statement?
Yes, sir, it is.
What name is on it?
Nick Krivanos.
Why Krivanos?
Because that is how they spell my name in Russian.
Your Honor, the defense rests.
Proceed to closing arguments.
Thank you, Your Honor. Gentlemen of the jury, on May 14, 1917, the defendant, Nick Kamanos, drove his automobile to the village of Castle Shannon, and with him were 4 other men who have been identified as Mike Titov, Sam Barkins, John Tush, and Maraska Garrison. The automobile was turned around so that it was headed in the direction it had come from, and 4 men left the automobile and went to the First National Bank, Castle Shannon. Some of them were armed with revolvers, and they went there for the purpose of robbing the bank. The men who went into the bank shot the cashier, Daniel McLean, and the assistant cashier, Frank Irby, killing them both. The defendant is on trial for the murder of Frank Irby. The 4 men ran from the bank, 2 of them heading toward the golf course and woods, and the other 2 heading back to the automobile, where Kamanos was instructed to start the car because there was a, quote, fight back there. If the defendant was with the men in the bank, he's guilty. Squire Beltsuva, town's justice of the peace and chief law officer in the community, says Kamanos was in the bank. Mr. Rawa, a witness who was in the bank, is unsure, but says there were about 6 men in the bank. We have testimony from witnesses who saw no one with the getaway vehicle, meaning that Mr. Kamanos had ample time to go to the bank and get back to the vehicle before these 2 men came up the street with a crowd following them. The defendant claims he was not at the bank. If he was there, as I have said, he was guilty. If the fact that he was not in the bank, it does not require an acquittal. If the fact is that he was not in the bank, you have this situation. The defendant came to Castle Shannon conveying a party of armed men who came to rob the bank. He waited for them, and when they came running, firing at the pursuers, and the pursuers firing back, he helped these 2 men escape. When a man is with a gang of robbers and flees with them, the natural conclusion is that he was a participant or a confederate. Whether you draw that conclusion or not is for you to decide. The Commonwealth has shown through testimony that the defendant knew some of these men before, had been with one of them at McKee's Hotel, was with one of them at a saloon in Fairhaven the Friday before the robbery. He was seen in Castle Shannon a week before the robbery, watching the bank during the lunch hour, which is the same time at which the robbery occurred. We have testimony from Nicholas Yost, who says he was shot in the leg by a bullet fired from the automobile, specifically from the side where the driver would sit. Mr. Kamanos said he did not fire on the crowd. However, if he did fire on the crowd and did hit Mr. Yost, that is a significant thing. It speaks to his knowledge of what was taking place, a bank robbery. The Commonwealth asks you to find that he had knowledge, aided and abetted the escape, and was party to the robbery. Where a crime is committed and a man flees with some who were shown or proved to the satisfaction of the jury to have committed the crime, it is for the jury to say whether the flight is an admission, a confession, or knowledge of the crime. This is guilty knowledge. If the defendant was at the bank, he's guilty. If the defendant knew the purpose of the four men, he is guilty. If the defendant took them away, thus aiding and abetting them, he is guilty. Thank you.
Defense closing argument?
Nick Kamanis was hired days before the Castle Shannon bank robbery as a chauffeur by Mikhail Titov, who said he and some friends needed a ride to a Southside mine to seek work. Kamanis did not know Titov. However, Titov knew of Kamanis, or more importantly, of his new vehicle, a touring car capable of holding 5 people. You see, Nick's landlord was married to Titov's sister. Nick refused to drive Titov anywhere unless he was paid in advance. Titov gave him $7 to drive him and his friends to the South Side. Given the stop on the way to the saloon, Nick probably assumed he was a designated driver for the 4 men who seemed more bent on getting hammered than finding employment. Now, the Commonwealth claims that Nick Kamanis was in the bank for the robbery, knew what the 4 other men planned, and aided and abetted in the flight of the 2 of them from Castle Shannon. Let's take this a step at a time. First, Kamanis didn't know any of these men. If he did, why would he charge them $7 to rent a machine? And if he knew they wanted to rob a bank, why charge $7? He would obviously be making much more in a bank heist. He demanded payment in advance because he didn't know Titov and didn't trust him to pay him if he didn't get the money up front. Kamanis testified that he remained with the machine the entire time, occasionally napping in the car. Dr. Brown's wife testified that she saw him standing near the car and it looked like he was checking a tire, but that she didn't see him all the time. How could she? She was viewing him from her home. She never came down to investigate. When Kamanis napped behind the wheel, he would have been at the farthest point from her sight line. And we have several witnesses, including the defendant, who testified that the vehicle's top was up. Furthermore, Dr. Brown's wife testified that she saw a man standing by the car. She did not attempt in her testimony to say that that man was Kamanis. Stanley Rawa said that he's not sure he saw Kamanis in the bank. But Rawa's testimony comes into question. First, he thought there were 6 men in the bank, or maybe it was 5. He admits that he was scared and not sure. Second, Mr. Rawa's testimony changes significantly from what he said in Nick's first trial, where he was acquitted of the murder of Daniel McLean. In that trial, he says he can't say whether Kamanis was in the bank or not. Now he can. Gentlemen of the jury, Mr. Rawa's testimony has differed every time he's been called to testify. In the coroner's inquest, in Sam Barkin's trial, and in the trial of Kamanis for the murder of Daniel McLean, for which Kamanis was acquitted. We also have the testimony of George Beltshoover, the Justice of the Peace for Castle Shannon, who testified that he saw the witness come out of the bank. In fact, that he was the first one out of the bank. Of course, when Mr. Beltshoover opened fire on the 3 robbers, it was with an unloaded shotgun. After 3 tries, Mr. Beltshoover says it was getting a little bit warm out there, and he took shelter behind some shrubbery. In the course of the robbers passing Beltshoover, he was cold-cocked with a bag of coins, which resulted in disorienting him and breaking his nose. Beltshoover admits he was fearful for his life, and fear of death can often cloud one's judgment when it comes to details. In fact, in one detail, Beltshoover's judgment has already been questioned. During the coroner's inquest, Beltshoover testified that the first man out of the bank was Sam Barkins, the man who supposedly shot himself in the woods. Further, we have the testimony of H.J. Brown, a businessman who was among the half-dozen or so who gave chase in the funeral director's hearse. Brown says when he approached Kamanis' machine, Kamanis says, "Me got no money, me got nothing." Now the Commonwealth has twisted this around to mean that Mr. Kamanis was referring to the money from the bank robbery. Put yourself in Nick's shoes. Your car has just been run off the road by another vehicle. More than a half a dozen men disembark with the first three pointing pistols at you as they approach. Would not your first instinct be to think that you are being robbed? Then the plea, "Me got no money," is one for fear of one's life. "Don't shoot me. I have nothing of value on me." And he didn't. No weapon, no money, nothing. And we have testimony that they searched his pocket and his vehicles and found nothing. As for knowing what his clients, who said they had hired him to look for work in the mines, were actually up to, Kamanis testified that when the two men approached the car, they told him to get going, that they started a fight back there, meaning the other two men. And Kamanis started his vehicle and drove off. The two men continued their banter about the other two men starting a fight, while Titov told Nick where to drive. Eventually, they asked Kamanis to pull over and got out, saying, "The way you drive, we'd rather walk." During that time, Kamanis saw neither money bags nor weapons. In rebuttal, Mr. Charles Berger, a bartender, testifies that Kamanis was drinking in his bar the Saturday before the robbery with two men, one of whom he identified as Sam Barkins. Now, Barkins has testified that he didn't know Kamanis, was not drinking with him on Saturday, and Barkins testified that he was the first man who bolted out of the bank after the robbery. How was it that Berger came to recognize the man that Kamanis was drinking with? From a photograph in the newspaper, the day after the robbery. And when did Mr. Berger deem this information important? 5 months after the robbery, when he finally told investigators. Kamanis did not leave the car, and given that the men had already stopped once to enter a saloon, thought he was nothing more than a designated driver for four men who were more interested in drinking than seeking employment. Gentlemen of the jury, keep one last fact in mind, please. If Mr. Kamanis was found not guilty of killing Mr. McLean, how can he not receive the same verdict in this trial? Every mention of the preceding trial was objected to by the Commonwealth. Of course it would be. Mr. Kamanis was found not guilty. It's double jeopardy. Our founding fathers instituted this clause in the Constitution when it was first written. An individual cannot be tried twice for the same crime. If Nick Kamanis is not guilty of one murder, he cannot then be found guilty for the second, even if it all happened in the same criminal act, a bank robbery. Gentlemen of the jury, do your duty. And your duty is to acquit Nick Kamanis, as did the jury that preceded you in the first case. Thank you.
Gentlemen of the jury, the burden of proof in this case and in any case is on the Commonwealth to prove the guilt of the defendant beyond a reasonable doubt. Therefore, the burden is on the Commonwealth to show either one of two essential things. First, the presence of the defendant in the bank at the commission of the robbery and murder, and the Commonwealth must satisfy you that beyond a reasonable doubt before you would be justified in finding that to be a fact. Second, the burden is on the Commonwealth to satisfy you beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant had knowledge of the purpose of these men. As reasonable doubt, as you well know, gentlemen, is not merely any doubt. It is not a mere hesitation, neither it is any feeling of reluctance that you might have to convict. It is the duty of the jury to pause and weigh the testimony and to come to their conclusion deliberately. A reasonable doubt means that if you have in your minds, after a careful consideration of the case, an honest, substantial doubt arising out of all the evidence, which would leave your minds in grave uncertainty so that you conscientiously feel that you could not convict the defendant, it will be your duty to find him not guilty. But if the testimony is satisfactory, if it is such as would cause you to act in important matters of your own life, then it is your duty and would not have a reasonable doubt to convict. Excuse me. It has appeared, gentlemen, in this case that there was another trial. Witnesses have been asked questions whether they testified at a former trial. That was not a trial of this defendant for the murder of Frank Irby. I have nothing more to say to that than this, that I do not know, and I am satisfied that you do not know anything about that case. The verdict in another case should have absolutely no influence, upon the jury. The responsibility for this decision is upon you. If this defendant is guilty, he is guilty of the most serious offense, far more serious than ordinary murder. If he is guilty, he was one of the party who in broad daylight cruelly and wickedly shot and killed in the perpetration of a robbery. Under law, this is first-degree murder, and you have no escape from the proposition. If you find this defendant guilty, you can find him guilty of nothing else but murder in the first degree. A second point I wish to affirm. If the jury believes the defendant was simply assisting two men in escaping from what he believed to be a fight, then their verdict must be not guilty. This is affirmed, gentlemen, if your finding is that he was not in the bank and did not know the guilty purpose of the men who went to the bank. That is all, gentlemen. Do your duty.
After one day, the jury came back to ask the judge to dismiss them because they couldn't agree on a verdict. Judge McFarland told them to go back into the jury room and continue their deliberation. The second day, the jury returned with a verdict of guilty as charged at the mercy of the court. Judge McFarland rejected the verdict, informing the jury that there were only two verdicts permitted in this case: not guilty or guilty of first-degree murder. He ordered the jury back into deliberation. On the fifth day of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict.
Has the jury reached the verdict?
We have, Your Honor.
Will the bailiff please deliver the verdict to the court?
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree.
Will the defendant would please rise? The sentence of the law is that you, Nick Kamanos, for the murder in the first degree of Frank Irby, whereof you stand convicted, be taken hence to the jail of Allegheny County, whence you came, and that you be taken thence, as required by law, to the Western Penitentiary in Center County, Pennsylvania. And during the week fixed by the Governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in his warrant, that then and there in the building and in the manner and mode provided by law, a current of electricity shall be caused to pass through your body and continue until you are dead. May God in his infinite goodness have mercy on your soul.
Defense attorney Kramer then requested an appeal, to which Judge McFarland noted in the court records. Kramer eventually appealed to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, contending Kamanos had been denied his constitutional rights under the Double Jeopardy Clause of the U.S. Constitution. While awaiting his appeal in jail, Kamanos contracted the Spanish flu during the epidemic of 1919 and died. How serious was that flu epidemic? So serious that the Stanley Cup was halted 5 games into the finals. In all, more than 100 million people died of the flu worldwide, nearly 5% of the world's total population. The case of Nick Kamanos could have been history-making because it was 50 years later that the U.S. Supreme Court heard the first double jeopardy case in our country's history. That concludes our presentation. Thank you for coming.